Hey, my name's Ryan Caldwell. I'm 30 years old, white, and I live by myself in a small, rundown house on the outskirts of Cookeville, Tennessee. It's nothing special, just a single-story wooden place with a sagging porch and a yard that's more weeds than grass. The area is full of dusty red dirt roads, scattered old farmhouses, wildflower fields, and thick pine forests that stretch out forever. Summers here are brutal, the kind where the heat sticks to your skin like molasses and the air smells like pine sap and dry earth. I make my living as a handyman, painting houses, fixing plumbing, mending fences, whatever folks need to keep their places from falling apart. I'm not the flashy type. I don't advertise or chase big jobs. People around here know me because I show up on time, do solid work, and don't talk more than necessary. Word gets around in a small town like this. I drive an old Ford pickup that's seen better days, and my days are pretty routine. Coffee in the morning, jobs during the day, maybe a beer on the porch at night while watching the fireflies light up the fields. That particular morning in early July, the heat was already building before the sun even cleared the trees. I was inside pouring myself a mug of black coffee from the pot I just brewed when I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. I glanced out the window and saw a familiar truck pull up. Belonged to Laura Harrington, the woman who lived two houses down in that two-story white house with the faded shutters and a roof that looked like it had weathered one too many storms. We'd been neighbors for almost 5 years, but we'd never exchanged more than a nod or a quick morning when our paths crossed. She kept to herself mostly, always in long-sleeved shirts, even in this heat, heading out early to drop mail at the post office or water her few potted plants on the porch. She was around 42, I figured, with a quiet way about her that made her seem older sometimes, like she'd carried more weight than most. But there was something striking in her features. Sharp green eyes, dark hair usually tied back, and a posture that said she'd been through hell but wasn't about to bend. I stepped out onto the porch as she got out of her truck, wiping my hands on my jeans out of habit. She walked straight up to me, no small talk, no hesitation. Her voice was soft but firm, like she was stating a fact rather than asking a favor. "Ryan, I need you to paint my entire house." I nodded, pulling a small notebook from my back pocket. My way of keeping track of jobs. "Sure thing. When do you want me to start?" But before I could jot anything down, she kept going, her words slower this time, like she was testing them out to make sure she wouldn't take them back. "I want to start over. Change the color, too." I paused, pen hovering over the paper. Her house had been white as long as I'd known it, clean, simple, but worn. "You want to go from white to anything, as long as it's not the old color anymore." There was something in her tone that stopped me cold. It wasn't about the paint. It was like she was talking about scraping away a layer of her life, erasing whatever memories clung to those walls. I didn't pry, I'm not the type, but I could see it in her eyes. A flicker of something raw, like pain she'd buried deep but couldn't quite hide. I just nodded again. "All right, I can start tomorrow. I'll bring some samples for you to pick." She gave a small, tight smile, the first I'd seen from her, and turned back to her truck without another word. As she drove off, I stood there on the porch, coffee going cold in my hand, wondering what kind of ghost she was trying to paint over. The next morning, I loaded up my truck with ladders, drop cloths, brushes, and a couple gallons of primer. The sun was already beating down hard, turning the air thick and hazy. I pulled up to her place right on time, parked in the driveway, and started unloading. Her house looked even more tired up close, the paint peeling in spots, wood showing through like old scars. I set up the ladder against the second-story wall, the one facing the backyard where the pines loomed tall. Each stroke of the brush made a gritty scraping sound as I prepped the surface, stripping away the old layers. The work was methodical, almost meditative. Dip, wipe, stroke, repeat. Sweat trickled down my back, soaking my shirt, but I kept at it, focused on the rhythm. That's when I noticed it. As I reached up to roll primer onto the eaves, a subtle movement caught my eye. The window on the second floor cracked open just a bit. Through the thin curtain, I could see Laura standing there, holding a mug of what smelled like coffee from where I was. She wasn't dressed up, no makeup, hair loose and messy like she'd just rolled out of bed. She just stood, watching me work, her expression distant, like the wall I was painting was her only window to the outside world. Our eyes met for a split second. I gave a polite nod, not wanting to stare. She didn't nod back, but she didn't look away either. She just stayed there, silent, as if the act of watching was enough. I went back to my brush, but something shifted in the air. It wasn't creepy or awkward. It was like she was letting me see her in a way she didn't let anyone else. Vulnerable, maybe, or just lonely. The morning dragged on, the heat cranking up until it felt like I was painting in an oven. I took a break around noon, wiping sweat from my forehead with the back of my arm, when a gust of wind picked up out of nowhere. It whipped through the yard, rattling the pines and sending dust swirling. Before I could react, it caught the edge of my drop cloth and flipped it up, knocking over an open can of primer. White paint splattered everywhere, across the grass, up the ladder, and right onto the second-story window where Laura had been standing. "Damn it," I muttered, grabbing a rag to clean up the mess. But then the window swung open wider, and there she was, looking down at the splatter on the glass. I braced for her to be annoyed. Paint on a window isn't easy to scrape off, but instead, she let out a soft laugh. Not a chuckle, but a real light sound that cut through the wind. "You made me remember that life doesn't stay clean forever," she said, her voice carrying down to me with a hint of amusement. I looked up, surprised. "Sorry about that. I'll clean it up." She shook her head, still smiling faintly. "No need. It's refreshing in a way." That was the moment everything clicked. Her words weren't just about the paint, they were about her, about whatever she'd been hiding behind that white wall. I climbed down the ladder, rag in hand, and for the first time, we really talked. She leaned on the windowsill and I stood below, the spilled paint between us like a bridge. "Why the change now?" I asked, gesturing to the house. She hesitated, then said, "Sometimes you need to cover the old to see the new." Her eyes met mine again, longer this time, and I felt a pull I couldn't explain. It was the start of something unspoken, right there in the hot Tennessee sun, with paint drying on the ground and the wind dying down. From that messy accident, the wall between us began to crack, and I knew this job was about to become more than just a coat of paint. From that day on, with the spilled primer still drying in the grass like an accidental confession, things started to shift in ways I couldn't have predicted. I showed up every morning at exactly 7:30, my truck rumbling down the dirt road, tools clanking in the back. The work became routine, scraping off the old layers, priming the bare wood, and rolling on the new color Laura had picked. A soft gray that reminded me of storm clouds rolling in over the pines. It wasn't flashy, but it suited her, like she was choosing something sturdy over stark white. I worked in silence, my gray t-shirt sticking to my skin with sweat and specks of paint, my cap pulled low against the sun. No chit-chat, no distractions. That's how I'd always done jobs. Focus on the task, get it done right. But every time I paused around midday, wiping my hands on a rag and stepping back to check my progress, there'd be a glass of iced lemonade waiting on the porch step, beads of condensation dripping down the side. Next to it, a clean towel folded neatly. No note, no explanation. It just appeared like clockwork. I knew it was her, Laura Harrington, the woman upstairs. She never came out while I was working, never hovered or micromanaged. But I'd catch glimpses. Her silhouette behind the thin curtains of the second-floor window, standing still with a cup in hand, watching the yard below as if the world outside was something she approached cautiously. One afternoon, the sky turned dark faster than expected. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and before I could pack up, the rain hit like a dam breaking. Fat drops pelted the ground, turning the red dirt to mud and soaking me through in seconds. I ducked under the narrow overhang of her porch, my back against the wall, water dripping from my cap. The wind howled through the pines, whipping branches like they were angry. I figured I'd wait it out, but then the door creaked open just a crack. "If you don't mind, come inside to wait out the storm." Laura's voice came through, soft enough to almost get lost in the downpour. I hesitated for a second, glancing at my muddy boots, but she stepped back, holding the door wider. I wiped my feet as best I could on the mat and stepped in, the warmth of the house wrapping around me like a blanket. The air smelled of peppermint tea and old wood, with a faint hint of lemon cleaner. It was cozy inside, worn hardwood floors, a few faded rugs, and walls lined with shelves of books and knickknacks that looked like they'd traveled from somewhere far away. A gray cat slinked across the room, curling up on the sofa without a glance at me. Laura handed me a dry towel, her fingers brushing mine for just a moment. Here, you're soaked. Thanks, I said, drying off my face and arms. We ended up at the kitchen table by the window, rain hammering the panes like impatient fingers. She poured me a cup of hot coffee from a pot on the stove, and we sat there, the storm raging outside while the inside felt strangely calm. I wasn't one to pry into people's lives. Folks hired me for my hands, not my opinions. But something about the quiet made it easy for her to talk. She stared into her mug for a long minute, then started, her voice steady but laced with something deeper. I used to live in Chicago, managed a chain of boutique hotels my parents left me. Sounds glamorous, right? Traveling, meetings, always on the go. She gave a small, wry smile. I didn't interrupt, just tilted my head a bit, letting her know I was listening. That's how I am, better at hearing than filling silences. I was their only kid, she continued, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup, nails short and practical with faint calluses I hadn't noticed before. They built it all from nothing, and I thought I could handle it. Thought I could control everything, business, life, you name it. Then I fell for someone. Hard. The kind that makes you feel like you're flying high. Until you crash. I watched her face, the way her eyes clouded over without tearing up. I didn't need the details to get it. Pain like that leaves marks you can see even if they're hidden. He cleaned me out, she said flatly, but her hand tightened on the mug. Emptied the accounts, sold off properties we'd put in both names, and ran off with someone half his age. Left me with nothing but my name and a stack of divorce papers taller than this table. She poured more coffee for both of us, her hand steady now, though I caught a slight tremble. I sold what was left, packed up and came here. Not to hide exactly, but I didn't want anyone seeing me like that anymore. Broken. The rain pounded harder, filling the silence between us. I set my cup down, thinking about my own quiet life. No big losses, but no big wins either. I always figured folks who choose to be alone are the strong ones, I said slowly. But sometimes, maybe they're just the ones who've been strong for too long and got bent out of shape. She looked up then, her eyes meeting mine, a sheen there that didn't quite spill over. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The cat jumped onto the table, purring softly, breaking the tension. From that rainy afternoon on, I didn't see her as just the reclusive woman upstairs anymore. I saw the cracks, the ones she'd tried to paint over with that white exterior. A soul pieced together with quiet determination, like the old wood I was sanding down every day. And in that shared silence, I realized I wanted to do more than just repaint her house. I wanted to be there, in whatever small way, to help fill in those gaps. One sweltering afternoon, with the sun dipping low behind the pines and casting long shadows across the yard, I was working on the back wall of the house, the section where the paint had faded the worst, flaking off in chunks that revealed weathered wood underneath. Laura was standing nearby for the first time, not hidden behind a curtain, but out on the porch, holding her cup of coffee and watching quietly as I rolled on the fresh coat. The air was thick with the scent of pine and wet earth from a morning sprinkle, and a sudden gust of wind whipped through, rattling the leaves and stirring up dust. I turned my brush a little too quickly to cover a high spot, and the wind caught it just right. A streak of gray paint flew off and splattered right across Laura's wrist. She jumped back slightly, staring down at the mess, and I froze, rag in hand, ready to apologize. But instead of frowning or brushing it off politely, she burst into laughter. A real, unguarded sound that echoed off the walls like it had been bottled up for years. "You know," she said, holding up her arm to inspect the streak, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "I've forgotten what it feels like to get messy without it meaning disaster." I blinked, caught off guard. It was the first time I'd seen her like that. Not the reserved woman from upstairs, but someone who might have once laughed freely before life wore her down. I managed to grin, wiping my brush on the edge of the can. "Sorry. Wind's got a mind of its own today." She shook her head, still chuckling softly. "Don't be. It's kind of liberating." We stood there for a moment, the wind dying down, and something clicked. I glanced at the half-painted wall, then back at her. "If you like it that much, I've got an extra can of paint here. Want to try your hand at it? Maybe draw something on this old section before I cover it up." She tilted her head, considering, her fingers absently rubbing the paint on her skin. For a second, I thought she'd say no, retreat back inside like she always did. But then she nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. Why not? That evening, after I'd packed up for the day, I came back, not as the handyman, but just as me. We spread an old tarp across the grass in the backyard, opened the spare can of paint, and grabbed some brushes. No plan, no rules. I started with something simple: a clumsy sketch of a rolling field, a little dog chasing its tail, and a steaming mug that looked more like a blob than coffee. Laura sat cross-legged beside me, dipping her brush and adding details, straightening lines, blending colors with her fingers until it started to look alive. That dog looks like a crumpled pillow, she teased, her voice light as she smudged the edges. Yeah, well, it's an imaginary one. No real dogs around here, so I had to improvise. We both laughed, the sound mixing with the crickets starting their evening chorus. Then it went quiet, but not the awkward kind. Just easy, like we didn't need words to fill the space. As the sun set, painting the sky in oranges and pinks, we kept at it, our hands brushing occasionally as we reached for the same brush or shared a rag. By the time we stepped back, the wall was a mess of colors and shapes. Nothing artistic, but it felt right. We didn't make it a thing, but after that I started stopping by more often. At first, it was with excuses. Checking if the paint had dried evenly, dropping off a tool I'd forgotten, or bringing over some leftover lunch I'd whipped up. Simple stuff like sandwiches or soup from my kitchen. But deep down, I knew it wasn't about the job anymore. Each time Laura brewed coffee, the minutes stretched out, turning into hours. She'd tell me bits of her old life. How her dad used to play old rock records on Sundays, or the dress she loved wearing in Chicago before everything fell apart. I'd listen, nodding, sharing my own scraps. Growing up in this same town, learning my trade from my uncle, the quiet satisfaction of fixing things that were broken. One time, while she was dusting the bookshelves in her living room, I sat on the porch steps, nursing a cup of her coffee, and asked offhand, "You ever feel like you're too set in your ways for something new?" She paused, rag in hand, and came to sit beside me. The wind rustled through the pines, carrying the faint scent of hay from the fields. "I used to think that," she said, her voice thoughtful, "until you splattered paint on my arm. Because I was clumsy?" She looked at me, her eyes steady. Because for the first time in years, I didn't get mad at something imperfect. It just was. We sat there as the afternoon faded, our shoulders brushing lightly, not on purpose, but neither of us pulling away. I don't remember the exact moment my feelings changed. Maybe it was her laugh over the paint streak, or the way her hand touched mine when we passed a brush, or that time she admitted, over a shared bowl of soup, that since moving here, I was the only one who'd bothered to invite her to do anything, even if it was just sitting and talking. But I knew it was happening. This pull toward her, quiet and steady, like the undercoat of primer holding everything together beneath the surface. And suddenly, I didn't want this to end when the job did. I wanted to stay, to be more than the guy with the paintbrush. The storm rolled in that afternoon faster and fiercer than the weather report had predicted. Dark clouds swallowed the sky over Cookville, and thunder growled like a distant warning. I was back at my place, wiping down my brushes and storing the paint cans in the truck bed when the first fat raindrops hit. Within minutes, the wind was howling through the pines, bending branches with sharp cracks, and the downpour turned the red dirt roads into rivers of mud. Lightning flashed far off, splitting the horizon, and then, pop, the power went out. The whole area plunged into darkness, the kind that's thick and absolute in the countryside, broken only by those erratic bolts in the sky. I glanced out my window toward Laura's house. Her porch light, which had been flickering weakly, went dead. I didn't think twice, grabbed my flashlight from the kitchen drawer, shrugged on a thin rain jacket, and headed over. The rain pelted my face like needles as I crossed the yards, my boots squelching in the muck. Her door wasn't locked. It never seemed to be out here where folks trusted each other more than they should. I knocked lightly, the sound muffled by the storm. "Laura, it's me. Came to check the wiring." The door opened a sliver, and there she was, illuminated by the faint glow of a single candle she'd lit on the kitchen table. Her face looked softer in the flickering light, the lines around her eyes less guarded, her hair loose and slightly damp from the humidity. The kitchen smelled of peppermint and the faint, comforting burn of pine from a small bundle she'd probably lit earlier. It was quiet inside, the rain drumming steadily on the tin roof like a heartbeat. I stepped in, careful not to track too much mud, and she closed the door behind me. "Thanks for coming over," she said, her voice low, almost swallowed by the wind outside. "No problem. Let me take a look at the breaker." I shone the flashlight around, heading to the panel in the hallway. Flipped a few switches, but nothing happened. "It's the lines outside, probably a branch down or something. We'll have to wait till morning for the crew to fix it." She nodded, not seeming surprised. "Sit down then, no sense standing in the dark." We ended up back at the kitchen table, the candle between us casting dancing shadows on the walls. The storm raged on, rain lashing the windows like it was trying to get in. She poured me a cup of hot tea from a thermos, peppermint, strong and soothing, and we sat there, the space between us feeling smaller in the blackout. No porch steps, no yard separating us, just two people facing each other in the dim light. She broke the silence first, her words careful, like she was afraid they might shatter the moment. "Do you ever think, if I hadn't asked you to paint the house, we never would have talked?" I looked up from my cup, the steam rising in lazy curls. "Maybe, but I figure something would have pulled me over here anyway, even if it was in a different way." She went quiet, twisting her mug in her hands, her fingers trembling just a bit. Outside, the rain tapped a slow rhythm, like the night was breathing easier now. "I've been here 3 years," she said finally, her voice dropping lower. 3 years is long enough to get used to not waiting for anyone. Then you show up. Not making noise, not promising the world, just there." My throat felt tight. I set the flashlight down on the table, clicking it off so only the candle remained, its flame steady and warm. "Laura," I said, calling her by name without that careful distance for the first time. I'm not good at fancy words, but I didn't come here just for the walls. Our eyes met and the silence stretched, thick with everything unsaid. It wasn't awkward, it was charged, like the air before a lightning strike. Enough time passed for us to both realize this wasn't just neighborly anymore. Laura stood up slowly, grabbing another candle from the counter. When she came back, her hand brushed mine as she set it down. Light, accidental, but neither of us pulled away. I closed my fingers around hers gently, like it was the answer to a question we hadn't asked out loud. "I'm scared," she whispered, her grip tightening. "Not of you, but if I let myself believe this time, I don't want to lose it all again." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words settle in my chest. The rain softened outside, turning from a roar to a steady patter. "I won't promise the big stuff," I said, my voice low and even. "I can only promise I won't disappear." The candle flickered, casting soft light across her face. We didn't rush. The first real touch wasn't hurried. It was just her hand in mine, warm and real, like an acknowledgement we'd both been waiting for. In that dim kitchen with the storm easing, I finally said what I'd been holding back through all those afternoons of coffee and quiet talks. "I love you," I admitted, the words coming out simple, no frills. "I don't know exactly when it started. Maybe when you laughed at that paint streak, or when I started making up reasons to see you every day." She didn't cry. Instead, she smiled, a slow, peaceful one that lit up her eyes more than the candle ever could. "Then stay for dinner," she murmured. "Not because of the blackout, but because of us." The flame stood still. In that small wooden kitchen, amid the darkness and the fading rain, we crossed the last boundary, not with noise or drama, but with quiet certainty. No turning back. From that blackout night onward, I didn't show up at Laura's just to paint anymore. Sure, I still brought my brushes, cans of gray, and gloves, but tucked in the basket on my truck were little extras. Old rock albums I'd scavenged from a flea market, a couple of worn paperbacks I thought she'd like, and pies. Apple ones with a crispy crust and cinnamon spice, a recipe I'd picked up from my grandmother years ago. Laura greeted me with her peppermint tea and a smile that wasn't forced anymore. Her eyes warmed when she saw me, her hair not always tied back so tightly. The house itself didn't change much on the outside, but inside it started to hum with the presence of two people instead of one. When I was up on the ladder fixing the gutters, Laura didn't retreat indoors like before. She'd stand on the porch, cup in hand, watching and occasionally calling out, "You sure that ladder's not leaning?" I'd grin without looking down. "Not sure, but if I fall, I'll aim for your side." The folks in town started noticing. Whispers floated around the general store. That handyman and the older lady down the road? Must be paying him well, huh? Some asked outright, cornering me at the gas station or her at the post office. Laura never answered. She'd just smile, pour her tea, and shut the door. Me? I'd shrug it off with just a job, but inside I knew it was more. One late afternoon, as we sat under the porch overhang together, the sun sinking low and turning the pines golden, Laura turned to me and asked, "You ever think this is strange? Someone like me, older, closed off, burned before, waiting for someone like you every evening." I looked at her for a long moment, the wind stirring the faint scent of fresh paint still lingering in the air. "No," I said finally. "The only strange thing would be if you weren't waiting." She didn't say anything back, but for the first time, she reached over and took my hand without needing a reason. No thanks, no declarations, just her fingers laced with mine, warm and steady. And that's how we stayed. Together without labels, without posting pictures online or changing last names or moving in under one roof. But everyone in Cookville knew eventually. They saw me biking over with wildflowers bundled in my basket every Saturday morning. They spotted Laura dropping off apple turnovers at my job site when the rain threatened. They noticed us sitting quiet at the corner diner, not talking much, but our eyes always finding each other across the table. This wasn't a fairy tale. No castles, no shiny rings, no crowds cheering. Just a woman who'd lived behind high walls for too long, and a younger man like me, painting over her cracks with patience, understanding, without asking, "What are we?" but instead wondering, "You want me to stick around a little longer today?" And her answering, "If you're not busy, don't go anywhere." Because love sometimes is just not going anywhere anymore.